Good evening. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Sydney Yeager. I'm the public programs producer here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I am so pleased to welcome you to the film premiere of Shema, A Story of Survival by Suki John. Yeah, woo! Yeah, so exciting. Here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. If you did not have a chance to see our exhibitions today, we hope that you'll return to the museum and see our newest exhibition, Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark, the museum's first exhibition for visitors 9 and up, which tells the amazing story of the Danish rescue. We also hope that you'll join us for our upcoming programs, including our Family Day for Courage to Act this Sunday, and the second annual New York Jewish Book Festival running from November 9th to November 19th. Before we begin, I would like to remind you to turn off your cell phones during the screening. Also, you should have received a note card as you walked in. If you didn't get one, we'll pass them around at the end as well, where you can write down your questions for the Q&A at the end of the panel, which will be collected about halfway through that panel. I also want to introduce our panelists who will be in discussion after the film. Suki John, the film's director and choreographer, 2 performers from the film, Keith Saunders and Kira Ray Daniel, and Dr. Michael Berenbaum, historian and director of the Sigi Ziering Institute at American Jewish University. I would also like to make a note that there is a typo in the program. Kira is earning her master's in arts administration from Columbia University. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Suki John.
Good evening. Thank you so much for coming. I want to thank Wendy Perron for coming to be our moderator this evening, which is a wonderful honor, as well as having Rabbi Michael Berenbaum, Professor Keith Saunders, and Kira Ray Daniel. I am thrilled that you're here. It's only taken me 30 years to make this happen. The first iteration of this choreodrama was in the former Yugoslavia, where there was a company, a multinational company that no longer exists in a country that no longer exists, that commissioned me to make a work. And it was an evening length work. I could do whatever I wanted, and I realized that I could only make a piece about what happened to my family in that part of the world. So, is that better? Is that better? A little better? Okay. So I created this work, the story of my mother and her family during the Holocaust. My mother is the protagonist, and she is portrayed by a character named Olya, who's named after the first dancer in the former Yugoslavia who played the role. Her brother is called Sasha, because that dancer was named Sasha, and I also happen to have a brother named Sasha. The parents, father and mother, represent my grandfather and grandmother, and I want to say that my cousins, Michael and Christopher Polgar, are here tonight. I'm really pleased about that. And you will hear Christopher's voice and our grandmother's voice in the score. The score was written and performed by a brilliant Serbian composer. He is no longer with us, but he really gave life to the score. His name was Suba. Afterwards, we're going to have a Q&A. I really look forward to hearing what the panelists say, and I really look forward to your responses to the film, Shema, A Story of Survival. Thank you. I would like to introduce our wonderful moderator, Wendy Perron. Rabbi Michael Berenbaum, who has flown in on the red eye to be here with us today. Professor Keith Saunders, you just saw in the role of the father, and the fabulous Kiki Ray Daniel, who you saw in the role of Olya.
Well, I just want to say that was a very intense experience. It's hard to keep it together during that, I felt. Thank you for illuminating the stories and the issues. So I want to start by asking Suki, when did you start hearing your mother's stories?
I don't remember. I refer to this as the oldest story I know. I just knew that she had been through this experience, but she was very careful not to give me any gory details, and I had to ask her. She tended to focus on the human lessons, the philosophical lessons, rather than the physical experiences.
I mean, one of the things that was amazing about this piece that you showed is that you could see that the families were already torn apart, even before anything happened, even before the Nazis came with their locusts, that the families had to make decisions, and it was just tearing people apart.
Yeah, so my mother talked about how in 1939, when the Nazis invaded Poland, she found out she was Jewish. She didn't know before that because many Hungarian Jews, Austro-Hungarian Jews, were very, very assimilated. And so it just, wasn't a big deal, and she didn't even know until she had to know.
Well, if she didn't know, how did the Nazis know?
They had records. They kept very, very good records.
It's amazing. I felt that I was amazed at how deeply you went into the violence of it, and the scene where the woman Rachel has a baby and it's taken away, and so it's not. It seems like it's not, and I wonder if your mother, put this across to you, that it wasn't just the violence, the rote violence, but it was the sort of almost pleasure in the violence.
It was the sadism.
Yeah, sadism.
So many little things she told me. The story of Rachel is something that I actually added into the story based on my research. So I did a lot of research. My family's story is essentially what you see, but there's a lot of things that were added in based on the extensive research that I did. And I knew what had happened to babies and twins and young children. And my mother always was convinced that they had given her some weird hormones, and her endocrine system never recovered for her whole life. But the Rachel thing was always for me like the deep, dark heart of the work, the taking of the baby. Yeah.
And I thought it was masterful how you told that story, because that moment when she has the baby and they smile and mazel tov, and then it just goes into this horrible, cruel thing. So I felt like you had us going like up and down, and that's why it was such a sort of rich but also distressing experience. So I want to ask both of you who were in it, Kira and Keith, whoever wants to answer first, what was difficult for you about doing this role?
I'll go first. I know for me, it was trying to tell the story, trying to really embody the character and the person, that Suki's mom was. The Holocaust is something that I learned about in school for years. And so now that it was my job to tell the story, I was really nervous about it and wondering if my technique, my ability to embody the role would be enough to share the story with audiences that watch the film. So I think that was the most difficult part. I also think going through the process of filming and seeing the stories and the things that happened during the Holocaust, like seeing that reenacted, that was very difficult. I know backstage sometimes we would talk about the insect scene and how some of the dancers had a very hard time doing it, especially the part when Red, it's very clear that she is being sexually abused in that scene. And so it was very hard because it felt so real. And every time when we were doing an intense scene, you know, it was like, don't laugh, you know, like there is a bigger message that's being told here. And so like there were moments where you just had to really be like, you know, serious and in it and recognize the power and recognize the history behind the story that we were telling. So I think that was the most difficult part of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Kira. Sort of the monumentalness of what we were telling, the incomprehensible inhumanity that was shown. That was a part of the story, finding a way to kind of try to get inside those characters and depict what they were going through. I was saying to Michael earlier, you know, it's just still. All these years later, it's difficult to wrap your head around how human beings could have done that to other human beings. And so trying to get into a place to try and find the truth, if you will, of what those characters, of what those people went through was the challenge for me.
I thought you communicated your character so well, and where you were so regretful of the decision you had made. That just came across so clearly, and you had flashbacks during that, and it was really a heart-rending part of the film.
Thank you. You know, and for me, I was asked earlier this evening, we filmed this project in June of 2022. And so, of course, since then, it's been edited and finished and finalized. And I've seen various versions at points in those at various points in the process. Having come to this museum earlier today and spent an hour and a half or so here at this museum, and viewing the film again tonight, it hits home in a different way. It hits home in an entirely more visceral way. I took a picture of something in an exhibition because my character, a ghetto survivor, said, there were thousands of us in the ghetto, and by the end we were all starving. People would do anything for a piece of bread.
Even fight with their son or their father.
And so, you know, the scene where I, you know, actually take bread from my own son for my own survival, it's, again, it's the scope of it is just, it's still hard to, you know, still comprehend even today.
The depth of inhumanity. Yeah. I think I read something like that in one of Eli Wiesel's books. Was that some research that you did about the father-son thing?
No, this happened.
Yeah.
My uncle wrote in his, he had a secret diary. He just kept writing, I'm hungry, and hungry, in bigger letters. And then his father took a piece of bread from him. And I have always thought that that was the beginning of the end of my grandfather's life.
And because I know I read this in Eli Wiesel, I think it was very common. Everyone was so starving they were reduced to subhuman kind of. I also want to ask Keith and Kira, what it was like for you being not Jewish, not white, being African American in these roles.
Well, for me, I kind of from an acting point of view, kind of from a sense memory point of view, there's certainly experiences I've had in my lifetime of experiencing racial prejudice, experiencing being othered, shopping while black in New York City, trying to get a cab on the Upper West Side. I don't know, I guess everything is Uber now. Maybe we don't have that problem anymore in New York, I don't know. But from that perspective, there were certainly elements of my own personal experience that I feel like I imagined into the character from a kind of, as I say, a kind of sense memory and acting perspective, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, mine's similar to Keith. I remember when I was being coached by Suki for Nightmare, which was a really challenging solo for me to really get into. I remember Suki told me, she was like, you have to make it personal. Like, you have to find a way to embody the character, make my mother your own. And so there were times when I was sitting in my room and I was reflecting, and I was like, wait, like, I've experienced this before as a Black woman in America, and who attended an all-white institution. Like, I imagine that a lot of emotions that Oya, Suki's mom, had experienced, I had experienced. And so there were a lot of moments where I could really just tap into my own experience as a Black female living in America and use that and channel all that energy into embodying the role.
And I also, excuse me, Wendy, I also think this was an important part of Suki's progress in reimagining Shema as a film. And I dare say they were deliberate choices on her part to cast African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, people from across the spectrum, straight, homosexual, because all of these groups, and also sort of taking it out of a specific time and place, and all of those different groups were of course, persecuted by the Nazis, but that was a deliberate decision on her part to make it timely for contemporary audiences while still being true, absolutely true, to the story of her family, of her mother and her family.
I think so too, and I think you expanded the story by the casting, and also at the end when you were doing the chalk and you put down Fred Hampton and Trayvon Martin and other people who have been persecuted, maybe not by the Nazis but by others, and that really expanded the whole idea of how this violence happens to an oppressed people.
It was very intentional.
Yeah.
It took a long time to figure out how to do that. So, yes.
Michael, do you want to say anything about your experience, bringing your experience to this viewing?
Well, let me touch on three things very basically. Number one, I think this is, if not a first, it's the very rare telling of a narrative in two things that don't normally mix, which is film and dance. And if you think of the creativity of dance and film and the Holocaust, this is one of the things that intrigues me. And it's one of the things that intrigues me because it breaks out of the conventional elements, and it's another form of narrative. Secondly, I want to touch on two elements that were reflected here. Let me tell the historical story about babies. Babies in the camp were very interesting and very enormously complex because it meant, number one, most women who arrived who were pregnant were immediately murdered. Auschwitz, there was selection, men to one side, women and children to the other. Pregnant women were immediately murdered. Some who did not know they were pregnant had abortions. But the birth of a baby, which is noted in literature, is very intriguing because all of a sudden you had innocent life. And I don't want to get political on this, but innocent life, untouched, untainted, in a world in which everything was brutalized and destroyed. So there are elements in literature in which the baby is born. Everybody embraces that baby because if there's something softer than a baby, I've never touched it. And then somebody goes and takes the baby and puts it in a little drowning water and extinguishes the life. Ordinarily, we would call that infanticide, but that was also rescue. And the other narrative of that historically is a baby who grew up, whom I know, who was born on December 29th, 1944 in Auschwitz. And that meant that that baby had to live 16 and 2 days, 18 days. And the reason that baby lived, it was that the baby was too weak to cry. And consequently, he is the youngest survivor of Auschwitz. One other element which comes to bread and hunger. One of the great Holocaust writers, a man by the name Primo Levi, said that had the camps lasted a little longer, they would have had to create their own language. We say hungry, and it means we missed lunch. They say hungry, they ate in 1940, and they ate again in 1945. And every moment of every minute they were hungry, so hungry that a father would take the bread away from his child. And you have a primitive recollection of that in Jewish ritual. You know, on the Seder, the first deed that we do is we break a matzah in half and we hide one half. And that is a slave never knows, or a prisoner in this circumstances, never knows where the next meal is coming from. And consequently, you have a decision to make with every piece of bread. Do I eat it now and satisfy a little bit of my hunger? Or do I wait and take it to when I'm actually much more desperate? And you have to hide it in two dimensions. You have to hide it from yourself, not to eat it all at once. And you have to hide it from somebody else in order what? Not to have it taken. Last point is that there's a survivor who wrote of friendship in the camps, and the last line told me he wrote an honest book, because he said, the most important thing is I remained human with my friend Ernesto, and thankfully things did not reach such a point where I had to steal his shoes. So his love of Ernesto meant that he understood that if desperation had taken in, he would have taken his best friend's, his only friend's shoes. Father taking a son's shoe. Those are the circumstances of oppression.
Thank you. Well, we do have some questions, right? Thank you. I think this is for Suki. Can you speak to the choice to alternate real-life scenes with abstract dance? I didn't think it was so abstract, but real life, or I think the memory scenes with the sort of dance scenes, the tango and things like that. There was unison, there was choreographic craft where there wasn't necessarily story or sort of elaborating on the story.
I think that the process of creating the libretto was, it was really instinctive. I worked very closely with the composer, the late Suba. I didn't have a dramaturg, we were the dramaturgs. And so I had to figure out how to tell the story, and I had to figure out with him how the music would support the story. So I knew that there were certain things that had to happen. For example, we wanted to show what life was like before the war, and we wanted to show a salon, which was very sophisticated and artsy, and we would have a leader. Originally, it was a Schubert leader, this time it was a standard, I'll be seeing you. But then we needed a metaphor for the spread of fascism because, we didn't have an army. We didn't want to get really representative in that way. So we came up with this metaphor of the cloud of locusts. I think that, we had this idea that we would use different musical forms, and that would allow us to use some different dance forms. But it was all in service of telling the story. So there was a level, I think, on which it was really instinctual. There was nothing theoretical about it. We were really working our way through how to tell the story.
Also, the first time the cloud of locusts came, the camera made a circle, and that made it even more sort of visceral, like those locusts were getting inside your body, kind of. So I thought that metaphor really worked. And this question gets to really the whole purpose of this museum as an educational institution. How would you translate this work into a teaching tool?
Oh, well, we're doing that.
Right.
As it turns out, the Shema project has 3 parts. We have the film, which we have edited down to 40 minutes, which fits into a class period in the high schools in Texas, where this film was made and where we got funding to go into the school system. We have upstander workshops that we've created. I've created them along with a theater professor, and they're very interactive. So we have a workshop for students before they see the film, and that has some historical background, but it also sort of prepares them to see a story told in dance. And then after they see the film, we have a post-screening workshop where they respond, and we do that with multiple intelligences, which is something my mother actually studied with Howard Gardner, Howie. And
something your mother studied?
She studied multiple intelligences with Howard Gardner. And so the idea that a student who maybe isn't comfortable doing a movement response might write a poem, or they might draw a picture, so that there's an idea that there's a lot of range in how young people can respond, but that they have a creative response. They get to say something, do something, respond. And the third piece is free educational materials. And with my cousin, Mishi Polgar, we have edited an online educational resource, a free resource, which has lots of chapters, including one by Rabbi Berenbaum.
Well, actually, I wanted to ask Michael also if you had something to add about the maybe other teaching tools, or what's your approach to educating people about the Holocaust?
Let me first say that we need to educate about this because unfortunately it echoes. I had a dream that I would live long enough to be irrelevant. And that is that I could contain this as ancient history. That's not the world we're bequeathing. It's not the world we're living in at this moment. For Jews, it's a world that's triply painful. Having said that, what Suki has done is very important, which is to mix history and the personal narrative. It was Stalin who said the death of millions of people. He didn't speak about murder. Death of millions of people is a statistic. The death of one person is a tragedy. What we try to do, what I try to do in all my education, is to deal with history and then incarnate it in the life of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 human beings. Because once you do that, it becomes real and it has a power that sticks with you and somehow can't get out of you. And that's when you really learn something.
Thank you. It's like journalism too, make it personal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you have made it personal. I mean, it's amazing. Are there any other questions from the audience or from any of you? Let me just repeat that in case people didn't hear it. The question is why Suki chose to use a theater as the environment for the film.
Such a good question. I believe that question is from Kelly Ashton Todd, who is also a dance filmmaker, and it's such a good question. I thought a lot about where it should be, and I spent a weekend imagining what it was going to look like as a film and where the film should take place. And I really didn't want to try to recreate a cattle car. I didn't want to try to, say, this is a concentration camp. I just felt like that was going to just be impossible. And my vision is very theatrical. So I just decided, this is a group of dancers. We're telling a story in our space, which is the theater, in our language, which is dance. And I just felt like that was, it was like the Aristotelian unities, it was like, we are here in this time, in this place, and this is where we do our storytelling. It felt to me that it stayed in its world in a way that we weren't trying to be something we couldn't be.
Let me just say one thing to that. This is what intrigued me about this form. Because we're in a museum. And a museum, you tell a story with the most concrete of all things, which are real artifacts. And the basis of most museums is the materiality of what remains of a historical narrative. And this is precisely the opposite.
I think Margot has a question.
Just before we get to that, I want to say that in the scene where the commandant is pushing people around this staircase, and for me, that was like saying, oh, people can be mean to people anywhere. It doesn't have to show you the concentration camp or the death march. It's like her dynamic and their exhaustion was so real.
That was exactly what I wanted to bring out. I thought it was the most creative moment in the whole film, as in the economy of where it was in the theater, the economy of the settings, and it left so much for imagination. And that staircase, looking down at the grandmother dying, was the most creative, brilliant part.
Well, I think we have to. I think we have to wrap it up.
We have a 9 o'clock curfew.
We have a 9 o'clock curfew, right? And luckily, we don't have anyone stabbing us and telling us that. I just want to congratulate Suki because I think this project is amazing. And I think we've all learned something from it tonight, and I want to thank the dancers and also the rabbi. And also the Museum of Jewish Heritage. Thank you very much.
Museum of Jewish Heritage. Yes, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity.